Ah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for taking the time out today to, talk about some disaster recovery and business continuity. I do have, as Jennifer said, I'm going to walk through this, and we'll have some questions at the end. And hopefully, this is as valuable to you as I feel it's going to be. So, with that, I will go ahead and start right through with the presentation. So, a little setting the foundation here. I think that Sir Winston Churchill said it, the best. He who fails to plan is planning to fail. End of the day, as long as there's a backup strategy, you do have a DR or a business continuity strategy. But is it good? Is it meeting what the business is asking for? Nobody knows, because I've seen it fall on both sides of the coin, whether it's the business thinks we can have this, that everything is good for 24, we don't need to get back up for 24, 48, 72 hours. We can function fine. And then there's an email hiccup down for 15 minutes, and, business officials are freaking out because they don't have access to their email. And I've seen the opposite as well, where, they're expecting very tight RPOs and RTOs, and they don't see the ability to apply any budgeting to that, so they think that they can, have a 4-hour RPO while they're still writing to tape. That it's just not a feasible operation. So we have to, and that's hopefully we get out of this today is, ensure that you have a plan that meets the business requirement to ensure that everybody is on the same page, and you're set up for success without any issues. All too often this ends up being the case is, some business person, I'll say, whether it's a manager or whatnot, breaks something because they think they know what they're doing, and then are not sure where the disaster recovery strategy actually is. Unfortunately, we've all probably walked in shoes very similar to this poor IT guy's stance. But end of the day, hopefully after today you'll have a better approach, and if we're more than willing to be able to assist you if you do have any further questions around it, or you want something more directed for your environment. Here's a little. Here's some. By the numbers. Companies lose 300,000 hours annually to unplanned downtime. That's a pretty big number. The average IT support downtime costs $212,000 per hour. Granted, it's the average. Some of us on this call may not be standing in that same ballpark. It may be much less. It could even be much more, depending upon, your business model and, and what you're doing. But it is reality. It's, as you can see, I'm not making these numbers up. This came from the, OISG group. It's their numbers, And the other one that I look at, IT support downtime reduces company ability to generate income by more than 22% annually. That's, I have a saying that if you're not doing something to help the business, why are you doing it? So here we're, possibly doing the opposite, So in our conversation today, and like I said, due to this being just a short webinar, I can't go overly deep, but, we do want to ensure that we are covering some very key points to a successful business continuity, disaster recovery, and backup strategy. There's really two constraints that we talk about when we're trying to design these, and the one is made up of the recovery point objective, which is, how much data can be lost, and your recovery time objective, which is how much time until the systems come back up. And then there's the maximum tolerable downtime, which is the max amount of time that the systems are down, because having RTO and the MTD can definitely be looked at differently. Some people look at them as the same, and it can be just for your business, but I would look to say that, understand that that's not always the way that it works. But, when you're looking at this, time is really the big constraint here, because as I said when we started off, that as long as you've got a backup strategy, you've got to just a disaster recovery plan, because you could always pull back tapes, roll them back, whatever you're using for backup media, and restore. Your RPO is probably going to be very long, and your RTO is going to be even longer. You know, so you're probably looking at a significant outage in that event. The business is okay with that. That's fine, but the sad state is most are not. So backup is normally more viewed for archival and not so much as a DR strategy, but in some cases, it is what it is. So, like I said, in this situation, the first constraint, it's all about the time and where the RPOs stand and where the RTOs stand and what makes sense for the business. And at the end of the day, as long as it's what's best for the business, and the business is in agreement that for this amount of money that we're willing to spend, this is what we're accepting as being down. The more that we can automate these processes, the easier we can pull them together and ensure the success. That tends to shrink a lot of those time windows. So a few more industry stats around where these constraints actually start to come from. You know, 95% of network changes are performed manually. And I will say humans are not the most, humans are the most error-prone vehicles that we have to be able to do our jobs. You know, automating things is a much better approach. So all the DR strategies that we look to try to deploy have some level of automation behind them due to the stress that's involved as soon as the DR is declared. So the more you can automate, it makes it that much easier to test, and it makes so you know that your scripts are working or your automation vehicles are functioning as they're supposed to be, and it takes a lot of pressure off in the event of a failover and lets you focus on things that may not have come up correctly or other aspects of your DR strategy. 70% of policy violations are due to human error again, and 75% of OpEx is spent on changes in troubleshooting. You know, so 75% of the time that the business has for the IT department is spent on keeping the lights on. You know, so this just goes to speak, you know, very, very loud to me that we need to ensure that we're simplifying things and ensuring that when we do go to cut over, nobody's got extra time in their cycles to be able to cover any type of a disaster event. And 87% of the 3,000 surveyed IT professionals reported suffering an attack in 2016. So, you know, that's, you know, one of the other things that we look at here is, you know, what is your threat zone? And ransomware today has become a significant reason for DR strategies. When we look at, you know, companies like Equifax can be hacked. You know, if Equifax can be hacked, I'm going to say that pretty much everybody can be hacked. You know, not that Equifax is that wonderful, but they are definitely designed around security and the protection of the data that they do house because of all of the personal data that is there for, you know, obviously just about every American that's walking. All right, so on to constraint number 2. All right, you know, we have many different threats that we have to be concerned with. You know, let's look at today with the hurricanes that are affecting Texas and Puerto Rico and Florida. You know, upstate New York, probably not as much that we have to worry about hurricanes. But if you think back a few years, I had some good friends that were significantly impacted by a hurricane that flooded out a lot of upstate New York as well. Tsunami, probably a stretch. But, you know, again, it comes back to what are we trying to protect against? It's not something that we would necessarily think about today for upstate New York. However, power outages, absolutely something that we would be thinking about inside of upstate New York. You know, some of this area can end up with, you know, 7 feet of snow in a 2-hour period, or I mean, in a 24-hour period. You know, that's easily takes down power lines and can leave significant power outages. All right, you know, and one of the biggest contenders for causing disasters, fire. You know, the fire in the data center is big. One of the, you know, in this outside of that is, you know, A lot of times people will leave the water in their sprinkler systems inside the data center, so if the data center doesn't catch on fire, the water pouring in because they didn't disconnect, they didn't discharge that or have a better fire suppression solution is definitely another easy way to take out an organization's data center. And then we look at the chaos monkey. We joked around in the invite about, the guy named Hurricane because he causes damage, but as I was showing you earlier in those numbers, most of our issues are caused by the individuals that are working on our environments, obviously, not maliciously, all by accident because we are just human. I'll take that one step further and say that most of the ransomware that gets fired off inside environments or attacks come from our end users who should be trained in what these attacks can do and how to prevent them. But people still click links and still cause pains onto their businesses. So the second constraint really is understanding what we're trying to protect against. All right. So it doesn't matter what it is. Every business is different. I've had to protect against the Northeast power outages, or I've had to protect against gas outages. I had somebody that just wanted to protect against a single data center issue. So a fire or something happening in their data center. And, I said, that's fine with me, but, you get 7 feet of snow in 24 hours, I would think I would want to get something a little bit further outside your geo, but if that's all the business is requiring, that's fine. It comes back to those business expectations. So, like I said, the second constraint really is, what's the threat radius now? What are we protecting against? And that starts to help to define a lot of what we need to do, because if you've got a very tight RPO or RTO, we have to be able to look at, as the screen shows here, a secondary data center to get you outside of an immediate threat, and then possibly a third one to get you further outside of what's available inside of your replication times. So depending upon where we stand and what you're trying to protect against is going to dictate a lot of what's required to meet those RPOs and RTOs and ensure your SLAs or your service level agreements are all met. Because obviously if we bring up a DR environment and it's not functional, what's the point? We did it wrong. So we have to ensure that all of those things are all those boxes are checked, so to speak. So, this really is, very eye-opening a lot of times, because a lot of times the business doesn't even necessarily understand what the real cost of a disaster is. They're too busy. They're looking at, oh, the business is out, or I can't get my email, or whatever it may be. So we have to look at what's the unplanned downtime. How much is that impacting us? How are we not doing sales? When you've got you go to do a firmware upgrade and it takes out 5 stories of employees that have to go home because they can't work because you just took down their switch fabric, I would say that could be constituted as a disaster. And there's a pretty significant price associated with 5, 6 floors of people having to go home. That was not planned, obviously. So understanding when to state that it is a disaster is important as well. And then the replacement of infrastructure, in the events of, the fire or the water or, construction issues. We've had a data center fall through the floor, had a toilet leak above the data center, and it poured water all over it. Any of those things are going to cause a replacement of infrastructure. Now you've got to get the infrastructure, so the cost of that, but it's also the time associated with trying to get that infrastructure back into your facility so you can go ahead and start to do the recovery or bringing the environments back if you don't have someplace else. And then as I was, pointing out earlier, you've got the time. This starts to come down to an overtime conversation, because 75% of the time you're trying to keep the lights on, you don't have that type of overhead built into your labor hours. So you're putting additional stress onto the people doing the work, bringing the environment back up, and obviously the labor cost associated with that from an overtime perspective. And these are all pieces that a lot of times get missed when they're trying to calculate what is an hour of downtime to the business, whether that be, all the kids can't learn because we're now into more of a digital age and smart boards aren't working and teachers' laptops or projectors aren't working, so they have to go back and there's no more blackboards inside our chalkboards inside of a school. So how are we still going to get through our lessons to make sure that our youth is being educated properly? There's a big impact there. So, how can you protect the business and how do you protect the business? And it really comes down to ensuring that you've got a very resilient business continuity strategy. And, that's just the ability to continue the business to meet the expectations of the business. That's really all that that is, because the business leaders are the ones that should be ensuring that they understand what the impact to the business is for every hour of downtime. And as I called out earlier, when do you designate a disaster? The business is the one that has to do that, because if they might think that a 2-hour outage in the middle of the day is acceptable and it's not a disaster. But if you're on Wall Street, that's not acceptable. 2 minutes of downtime isn't acceptable for them. So that's when people have to understand, when do we declare a disaster? Because that's going to fall into your RPOs and RTOs, which is now part of your disaster recovery plan. So that's just the process the organization actually is taking to get things back up to meet those RPOs, RTOs, and SLAs. So you have to ensure that, the RTO is the magic number here. So if I say that my maximum allowable downtime is 4 hours, then I have to make sure from the time I lose data, the disaster strikes, to the time my systems are back up is only 4 hours. If I know that my disaster recovery process takes 3 hours, I only have a 1-hour window to make the decision of, is this a disaster or is this not a disaster? Because obviously there's a process that has to happen, and then there's a process of bringing it up and then bringing it back down. So you need to ensure that those decisions are made appropriately. And then I put backup and restore in here because, like I said, as long as you've got a backup and restore process that's functioning appropriately, and notice I put restore in there because that's really the important component. A lot of people back up, but if you're not testing to do a restore, that's just a bucket of data. Is the archival of data to ensure that the availability in the event of loss or corruption, so somebody's deleting something or some type of corruption happens, and this may be applicable for something like Trojans or some type of attack that happens. So this is where I was talking earlier when I said we have to look to see set the proper expectations. So when we're looking at this, you can't, when you're looking at the relative RPOs and the relative RTOs, this gives you a good scale on what your expectations realistically can be. You can't be using traditional tapes and think that you're going to hit seconds of downtime. That is the requirement behind there is to be active, or at a minimum, a hot site. You can't even say that, I'm going to just bring my environment up with traditional disks and think that you're going to have that type of solution. It's not possible to bring that much data back up. Even with all the automation in the world, you're not going to get it back up when you have a warm site or even a cold site. It's not capable. So this is where we need to leverage the business to find out what are the appropriate RPOs and RTOs for the business based off of what they deem is acceptable. So once we have those, we can then look to see, okay, if we've got days to weeks of impact, that's fine. Traditional backup with tape media coming back from Iron Mountain or something, but we can go down that road. But that's going to be your least costly usually, but it's also going to have the largest impact, in my opinion, and industry experts. Versus obviously active is not cheap, but It is going to give you the lowest downtime, and some people are actually leveraging the cloud now because there is some options out there that in some cases are very attractive to DR to the cloud, so you don't have to worry about maintaining a second set of hardware or worrying about the maintenance cost associated with that, or where am I going to put it, because those are all considerations when we start looking at this. But this is a little chart that I leverage a lot when we're having conversations around reality. I call it make-believe, and then there's reality. And I think this here starts to put a lot of reality into perspective. Believing that you can use tape, as I said before, and get 15-minute RPO, or 15-minute RTO, I mean, is living in the land of make-believe. And anything's possible there. So, this here is where I was alluding to earlier. 93% of the companies that lost their data center for 10 days or more due to a disaster filed bankruptcy within 1 year of the disaster. So, that's a pretty significant number when you stop to think. And what did the people in Houston and in Miami have for disaster recovery plans, and how many businesses are going to be filing for bankruptcy now because of failing to plan? So from a backup perspective, I am a firm believer in this. It's a 3-2-1 practice, and it's to have at least 3 copies of your data, 2 of them on different media and 1 of them off-site. And this will ensure that you can hit those RPOs and RTOs, and even at worst case scenario, something devastating like what's happened in Florida and Texas, you can circle back and you may not be able to hit those RTOs, but at least you're going to have your data in a different location where you can possibly get that back and with an extended outage due to all of the area around you being impacted so severely. But this is, like I said, this is something I firmly stand behind and try and design all strategies towards this. So when we're looking at the business continuity disaster recovery strategy, and little questions to ask yourself or the business leaders, is my DR solution scalable? A lot of times organizations will expand or contract due to what's happening in that industry or in that company. So there's a lot of time, energy, and effort that goes into DR solutions. So I think that you need to make sure that they can grow, they can burst, or they can shrink based off of what the business is having at that time. Right now we're in a time where there's a lot of things that are going multi-cloud. So we've got some things that are sitting local and some things are pushed out to the cloud. So we're seeing, some of those on-prem footprints being a little more elastic depending upon what's happening. And then are my compliance requirements being met? Do I have a PCI? Do I have a HIPAA? Is there some organization that I'm working with that says we need to have or you need to have a business or a disaster recovery strategy so I know that I'm protected in the event that you're impacted, you're not going to take me down as well. I know working with some larger organizations like Johnson & Johnson's or a few others that, that you need to have a documented, tested DR policy to be able to do business with them. So that's something that I definitely would make sure that you have and could possibly give your business an advantage working with some larger organizations. Are my RTOs and RPO objectives being met? Have I tested? Do I know that we can meet whatever the business says we should meet, whether it's a 5-minute RPO or a 5-minute RPO and a 15-minute RTO, or is it a 5-day and 15-day? Whatever is acceptable to the business, as long as you can meet that, that's all that matters. And then I will say, how do you test not even just my off-site solution, but your solution in a whole? I will say that a lot of times, like I was alluding to with backup, people are not testing their DR solution. Oh yeah, I got a DR strategy, I'm just going to pull my tapes back and I'm going to spin them up, and I can make that sound like a very fast process until it's tried to be executed upon and we find out just how slow and painful that process really is. It definitely can be resume generating if we're not in lockstep with the business. And I will say that there's a lot of times that the business doesn't, it's a challenge to get the RTOs and RPOs from the business. So it's something that needs to be stressed, and there's times where we have actually gone in and done a operational resiliency assessment to assist people in understanding where things are and what they're doing. So I think, you know, one important note is to know the expectations of the business. And with that being said, you know, I really would like to thank you for taking the time out to participate in the webinar. As I said before, if you have any questions, or I'm sorry, as I said before, if you'd like to get, you know, a little more in detail with us, take the time to get a hold of your account manager or myself, and I thank you for the time.